possible that bloodlines and lineage play a role in experiencing ET phenomenon? Or that even the ability to conceptualize ideas and beliefs beyond ourselves is embedded in our DNA? Could this also be why some people have the ability to lucid dream and astral travel? And does it play a role relating to DNA and blood types? Researchers have been able to synthesize DNA to be able to store data like a hard drive, and have discovered that DNA can store a mass amount of data in small amounts, unlike any type of man made technology we have today. If that is really the case, what is really encoded in our DNA, and how do we activate it? Why do we dream? And if dreams are an expression of subconscious thoughts, then why do animals dream? How are we able to feel sensations like heat, cold, or pain in dreams? In this episode, we'll explore what it means to have human DNA, the power of the mind to transform DNA, which is epigenetics, how dreaming plays a role in our everyday lives, and how we can use the tools of dreaming to expand our inner awareness of ourselves. Jim Sparks, who is an abductee who recalls in perfect memory over 25 years of experience with extraterrestrials, states in his book, The Watchers, that they took him back to earlier times in his family bloodline, and it was also himself reincarnated. They told him that they watched certain bloodlines very closely, and if this is the case, it seems more than coincidence that both sides of my family encountered something out of this world. In the 1960s, my great-grandparents Chester and Meta Fiesel were driving home one evening, late one night, in the Ozarks, when to their surprise they were suddenly stopped due to an obstruction in the quiet country road. As they pulled to a stop, they watched as the spaceship remained parked in the road, and the crew of the craft was on foot, approaching in their car. Little green men surrounded the car, and they just watched as they approached it. I remember my grandmother specifically telling me. And then later, men in suits showed up at their house and told them not to say anything about their experience. Mita was a talented artist, painted a depiction of the craft, but regardless of how much my grandmother searched for it, it was never to be seen again. The story never recounted in a way that would portray they were afraid whatsoever. It was a nonchalant story passed down through word of mouth by my mother and grandmother, and is the only way the story has survived. My grandfather, on my mother's side, was a Navy test pilot, attorney, and at one time worked at the Pentagon, although the details of his job while he was there was never made clear. It is also strange that my mother remembers being in the building as a child, although government clearance wasn't as strict as it is in today's world. But my mother was a unique child growing up. She seemed to be more advanced than others her age, and at the age of 4, living in like Washington, D.C., had the inclination to often leave the house at night, one time catching a bus at a bus stop and riding it throughout the night. There were many accounts of abductions in D.C. during that time, and she was known to be found sleeping underneath her bed instead of on top of it. So, you gotta wonder. I mean, during around the same time, my father was a young boy living in Chicago. He saw a large cigar-shaped craft in the sky and was also quickly approached by men in suits telling him not to tell anyone about the incident. And hearing these stories when I was young, not seeming that strange at all, and considering what I had already encountered, and left me fascinated by beings beyond our world. I was constantly drawing pictures of aliens and spaceships from an early age. I also didn't like sleeping in my own room. I would also have lucid dreams where I'd be able to wake up and try to wake up in the dream trying to cry out for help in hopes that someone would pull me out of the dream, but never with any luck. My earliest memory I have about an unusual experience that I still question to this day happened when I was about 3. I always seem to have a pretty good memory and recall from a lot of my childhood, but one night I was laying in my bed and my room light was still on. I was laying there, suddenly something began to appear in my doorway in the room. and what appeared to be like a dark figure kind of phasing into the doorway, almost like a hologram that was like strobing or glitching. As it became more clear, I watched as this like tall figure morphed into what looked like a man's body, but it was made entirely out of scraps of metal. It was dark shadows for eyes, and it moved into the room like phasing and like glitching. It lifted its left hand to me, pointing at me at what I thought was a gun, and many children might react out of a only attempt to defend themselves. I took the yellow wool blanket that was pulled it over my head, and I made it taut to make it seem like I wasn't like laying under the blanket. And after however much time went by, I pulled the blanket down and it was gone. I don't remember what happened later that night or even if I ever told my parents about it, but when I was around 10 years old, I also wrote a story about being abducted that I just recently found and soon became. I remember in middle school binge watching UFO documentaries, reading books on the subject, and studying crop circles and spirituality. And I grew up in a small town where I spent all the time I could out in nature and stargazing and working with the elements and elementals. But one day I was meditating at the park and I felt like I was being introduced to a long line of my previous incarnations, shaking each one of their hands. Although I couldn't necessarily see them, I have always been really sensitive to energy. And so, like, even in high school, I felt I was channeling a lady called Sally from the Pleiades who would give me advice on matters and send me loving energy. One time I had found a ring that I felt like it was from her, and I would wear it as a necklace. And then later on, like fairies and stuff. But after graduating high school, I moved down to Palm Springs. And I soon began a job in sales and had numerous interactions with individuals that somehow seemed to know me, even though I didn't know them. Although the lucid dreaming wasn't as often as when I was a child, sometimes I could dream of entire lives with complete memories that weren't from my current lifetime. So unfortunately, I didn't write them down at the time or recall exactly what they were, but I do remember in the dream it felt like a lot of time passing, like an entire lifetime, and the memories of that life coming to me in the dream. And throughout my life, I've experienced deja vu and sometimes experienced things I've dreamt before, and it was just flashes, but I was like, I've dreamt this. And when I was 20, I lost my father and went into like kind of an existential crisis about questioning my identity and what I was doing with my life and what any of us are doing with our lives. And my dad worked his whole life to die unfulfilled and leaving no legacy, like, or future generations. So I was just like, dude. So I moved to Joshua Tree, where I experienced a sound healing bath in George Van Tassel's Integratron and would meditate out at Giant Rock, where it said that Van Tassel himself interacted with otherworldly beings and taken aboard ship, where he was shown the blueprints to build his Integratron, which is a perfectly acoustic dome building with one of the functions being to reverse the aging process. And this is when I began having dreams about a light outside of my house. I was closing the curtains and locking the doors right before whoever or whatever could get in. One dream I recall was looking at my back door. The outside was like a red design, and the white door that looked like an eye with a spiral for the pupil. I also experienced interesting orbs when I would swim the water and felt like they were water fairies or mermaids or whatever, water spirits, which would explain why I often had a feeling when I was a kid like something was always nearby. My whole life, like in the water, it was like da-na-na-na. But then I was like, oh, they're just part of me. I then moved to Colorado, where I had the opportunity to study with a beekeeper and learning about the magical healing properties of their buzzing. I had my first biofeedback session where the lady doing it was surprised because she had never done a scan and gotten a result of someone having an angel in their aura. So I also stumbled across a group of friends who had experienced psychedelics and also claimed to have been abducted. So one night, a friend from that group and I walked to a park nearby their house at night, where a light orb appeared and danced around us in front of a mountain. And we were just overflowing with joy and laughter like children, without fear. And it was amazing. This friend also had vivid dreams and experiences with other beings, and one night I decided I wanted to take my first psychedelic trip on LSD. Within about 45 minutes, the adrenaline began to kick in, but I was able to calm myself down, and that's when both of us saw what seemed to be white energy bodies surrounding me, at least 6, if not more. And he was wondering what was happening, and I had a deep sense of peace and reassurance, knowing my team was with me like I always suspected. And then I saw myself at the top of a giant step pyramid. I feel like it was from Mexico, with blood pouring from the top. So, I mean, on other trips I experienced the pulsing and changing of sacred geometry and the effect of sound in things like the walls and like the snow. Just amazing geometrical stuff. But it was fascinating that I was experiencing something beyond the veil of what was already in plain sight, and we just couldn't see it. For the first time, it felt like confirmation to what I had already felt all along. So I moved back to my home 5 years ago, and back in 2020, I attended a UFO mega conference in Laughlin, Nevada. So during the conference, I had a dream of a gentleman shaking my hand, thanking me for completing my soul contract, as well as another similar, well, I wouldn't say similar, but another being, like a gray, I guess you would call it, walking up to me and pulsing me with this very powerful energy. I don't know if I could put into words how it necessarily felt. It's not an emotion, it was also interesting to me that the convention, like, seemed like people knew my mom and I. Like, even though it was the first time we had gone, one person that we befriended, he swears that we met there the year before. And months before the event, I kept like having dreams about the casino and would be around beings whose energy was like very intense. And when I was at the casino, who was hosting it, it felt like the casino for my dreams, and there was like attendees at the conference who claimed to be ETs, including one who was Pleiadian, Dale Harder. I felt like we were being observed, and the more I listened to each speaker, the more the puzzle pieces began to shape together. So during one dinner, we were sitting at a table, and with other people, and like one lady I had never met before somehow knew me by name. And she goes, "Ariel, you are not a wallflower." And I was like, okay, that's weird that you know my name. But I got 2 readings from people. One who claims to be a channel for like your closest dimensional version to give you a message, Elizabeth April. She's amazing. She said my 8th dimensional Pleiadian came to her, which, yeah. Another reading I got from psychic Mary Otis, who did feedback on the color of my aura and chakras along with the healing. And I was amazed that when I saw the scan after the healing that it showed me having wings as well as a face in the aura, and she claimed that I am an earth angel as well as an ET. So when I was standing when I was standing in line to ask one of the speakers a question, who claimed to have history with direct contacts of Pleiadians, one of the people in front of me asks him the question, well, what do they look like? And without even missing a beat, pretty much, he looked back at me and said, actually, that one looks a lot like, they look like a lot like the young lady right there, and heads turned to me, and I felt myself blush, and I am often aboard what looks like a ship, and they have been conditioning me for the past few years to be able to interact with other beings and be putting me through fear simulations to test my lucidity as well as the power to control my mind. It started by being in an observation type area where I'd be trying to escape, and then I began becoming lucid enough. I would start to be able to interact with who I was around. But one time I was in a group of around 14 beings standing in a semicircle. I asked what they wanted to do. I didn't get a response, and I told them, I can remember you. Like, That's all I can do. To which the like blonde humanoid looking guy to my right was like, yeah, bro, that's all we want is for you to remember us. So also in the group was like a Lemurian type with a pendant on her forehead right in front of me, and all the way to the left were two beings wearing cowboy type hats, almost humanoid but with pointier noses, and their skin seemed to be phasing in color between green and red and purple. But I figured out this like group is part of my star family probably, but I've gotten beamed into like a room where a young woman was wearing a lab coat and welcomed me to section 15, whatever that is, shaking my hand and showing me some holographic type screens. Lots of dreams. Like the interaction ranges in a lot of ways from observation to see how I'd react, some to get me accustomed to the energy of these beings, some to consciously give me data until it's needed, some to get me used to the pure adrenaline of being taken and the feeling of being like sometimes they're next to me over my bed and like looking over me. And yeah, so combinations of several things, but sometimes I feel like it's possible I'm experiencing other timelines, dimensions, states of consciousness. The experiences have become too real and vivid and elaborate for me to believe they're just dreams. And even though that's what my logical human mind wants me to believe, like, I have too many experiences to explain them all here, but I now feel more strongly than ever that I am here to spread awareness and help with disclosure. Recently I got an energy healing session where she also confirmed I am a hybrid, but wasn't sure about what species. I'm an anomaly. I don't know. But, so, if ETs have been behind the evolution of humans since the beginning, is it possible that we have mass amounts of data in our DNA that we just haven't tapped into? According to researchers, Rh blood types aren't originated from the same origins as other blood types, and may be extraterrestrial, is what I've been thinking. So, Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about epigenetics and the ability to transform ourselves from a genetic level to achieve our highest potential. So I believe that we have the willpower to evolve as an individual and is a huge factor in what we experience. But from what I have dealt with, it seems to me that the more you focus on turning your senses or your attention, the more you will see results. Whether that's astral projection, lucid dreaming, getting taken aboard a ship, evolving your consciousness and awareness, or changing your genetics. I mean, your mind is a powerful tool to shape your reality, which I tend to believe we are all living in a simulation. So, interestingly enough, Morpheus was a Greek god of dreams. Not much is known about his like particular shape and form, fitting for a god who is supposed to be in charge of dreams, but he's frequently depicted with wings, and what he is known for is taking the forms of humans. And is it a coincidence? Or did the writer know that that's why she chose the name and the character who breaks Neo out of the Matrix as Morpheus? So, I mean, we are playing a game of this reality, and the more skills and tools that you acquire, the more and faster you can level up. It does take time to process in your mind, sometimes the bigger picture, but only if you are open to the possibilities of the universal and conscious knowledge that's when you get the wisdom to open up. I mean, it does not open up to the person not seeking answers. As it is said, ask and you shall receive. So between conscious and subconscious thoughts, we are creating our reality at every moment, whether we are awake or dreaming. So you have the ability to access guidance. You might not be able to while you're awake, but according to Edgar Cayce, who was known as the sleeping prophet, and able to recover vast amounts of information by putting himself into a deep state of trance, there are 4 types of dreams we may experience. those pertaining to our physical health, those revealing our inner self's dynamics, those that are precognitive and psychic, and those that are visions from the higher spiritual realms. So, I mean, even ancient Egyptians and many other ancient cultures believed that dreams were like oracles, bringing messages from the gods. They thought that the best way to receive divine revelation was through dreaming, and thus they would induce or like incubate dreams, sometimes with certain substances. But oneiromancy is prophetic divination from dreams, considered a divine act in most ancient cultures and surviving in modern times in certain like folk traditions. But oneiromancy is based on the belief that dreams are messages sent to the soul by gods or the dead, most often as warnings. But as the Bible, we know that when the Pharaoh was having nightmares, Joseph interpreted the king's dreams, and in the process ended up saving both Egypt and his own family from famine and ruin. So as a result, Joseph earned both the respect and confidence of the Pharaoh, who made Joseph his second in command over all Egypt, and interpreted other dreams as well. And, I mean, when looking at quantum physics and reality, time and space cease to exist. So on a certain level, and the only reality that is, like, that which is being observed, which our brain and mind never actually are exposed to light, but interpret the light we see coming through our eyes. Like, be mindful of your words and thoughts, and always choose to love over fear. Love over fear conquers all, but do not fear the unknown, but embrace it. Do not avoid change, because change leads to growth. The future is bright. You choose your fate. You are going to choose your best possible timeline for yourself and the good of humankind. Be the hero in your movie, not the victim or villain. One of my favorite quotes: your mind is either your best friend or your worst enemy. So you decide. Peace, love, namaste.